And honestly, most devices, whether it's a car or a home computer or a TV or something, the on and off button are the same button. The issue is they didn't want you accidentally hitting the on button and turning it off when you're in the middle of something. So they wanted you to do an extra step to make it so that you could turn it off. Right. So there is a logic to it. It's just weird. You would think that there would be some more obvious way to identify the off button. Right. If you neglect, so if you hit second followed by on, it'll turn your calculator off. If you neglect to turn your calculator off, there is a what you call it, an auto shut off function. Right after a certain period of time, I never bothered to figure out what that was because I always turn my calculator off. Your calculator will turn itself off. The problem is it uses battery when it does that. Right? So what a lot of folks have done in the past is they have said, okay, it'll turn itself off, they'll put the cover on it and throw it in their bag. And then 6 weeks later wonder why they're changing their batteries. Whereas I've had my calculators for years and I change them maybe once every like 3 years. All right, so there, obviously there's battery consumption issues. Your calculator also comes equipped with a cover. I recommend you use that. If you've ever seen a calculator with one of those, it seems like a bullet hole in the screen, like a black blotchiness that looks like a bullet hole. That's because that's an impact. All right, so somebody threw it in their bag without the cover on, and the corner of a book hit it, or something other than a book, because I don't know how many people carry like textbooks anymore, but book hit it and it left a mark. Right. More dangerous is the error syntax. All right. So if you don't put the cover on your calculator and you put it in your bag, what's going to happen is keys are going to be pressed. It's going to bounce around in there, and you think this is ridiculous. Why is he talking about this? But it happens all the time. Somebody will say, I got an error message, and I'll say, let me see your calculator. I'll figure it out. I'll be like, all right, put your cover on your calculator. You'll hear me say it in this class at some point. All right? So keys will be pressed. The bag's jumbled around in there. I'm sorry, the calculator is in the bag, and it's getting jumbled around. The on button will be one of those keys that'll be pressed. Then a variety of other keys. Eventually, it'll settle on the Y equals key. And then the down key is going to get pinned down for some reason, all the way down to the bottom. And then a bunch of different random characters are going to get hit. And then your calculator is going to turn off. And so let me just put a couple of weird ones in there. And I'll just throw an X in there. All right, then your calculator is going to turn off. When you turn it on, you're going to be right back to the home screen and you're not going to see that anything went wrong. Then you're going to try to make a graph. So I have some graphs in here from another class. I'm going to hit graph. I'm going to get syntax. And you're like, okay, what's wrong with my graphs? There's nothing wrong with my graphs. These equations look fine. Okay, well, let me get rid of this one. Try it again. It'll do that. Dang, what is going on here? And I'll try it again. Maybe I'll try an easier equation. Maybe I just typed it in wrong. I'll put in just the number one. You can't go wrong with the number one. Hit graph. What? What is going on here? And then I'll say, hey, you see that one that says Godo? Yeah, it doesn't say Godo. It says go to. You get an error that says syntax. Go to means go to the problem. Option 2, it's going to take you to the problem. And you're going to see all of this stuff here. And you're going to be like, where did that come from? I didn't type all that in. And I'll be like, yeah, you did. When you threw your calculator in your bag without the cover on. And it bounced around in there. It all got stored in there for some reason. It happens. It has happened over 50 times in my career. 20 years, I know that's a long period of time. You think, oh, 50 times, that's not a lot for 20 years. But it's a lot. I mean, if that series of events happened once, it would be like, that's surprising. It happens frequently, right? So if you get an error syntax, you always select go to because it'll take you to the scene of the crime. All right. So you clear it out. Clear is your best friend when you're wiping out an entire selection of values. All right. If you're in a menu and you want to get it out of that menu, quit is your best option, because there's two ways to handle getting out of something. Like, you've started doing a calculation and you want to get out of that calculation. One way is clear, which I just mentioned. If clear doesn't work, then quit is going to work. All right, that's second mode. Second mode is quit. All right, that brings you back to your home screen. If you're ever in a weird menu or interface that you're like, I don't want to be here, you want to just go back home. Back home is quit. All right. What some people have done in the past, and this is, I'll tell you, I mean, it takes a little extra want to, I guess, but they have like scratched out the word quit and wrote home on it. Like, they have etched in the word home. I think that's probably going a little overboard, but I've seen people do that before, because they're like, I don't like, quit doesn't seem right. It's telling me I'm going home. Quit's going to take me home. Why don't you just have it say home? I agree, but that's how the TI people made it. All right, so simple calculations. I'll start with that. If you wanted to find the mean of a data set, you could just add these values up. You know, you could do a quick 15 plus 1, 15.1 plus 17.5 plus 18.3, and you can do it all in one shot, plus 14.1 plus 3.2 plus 6.0. You can just write the 6 or 6.0 and then hit enter. Now that little arrow on the left means that, you know, we've scrolled into the second screen. So if I hit the left arrow, it's going to bring me back. Now on the computer interface here, there's a little bit of a lag. So it takes a little bit for me to go, but it's a little quicker on your calculators. So sometimes the transition from first screen to second screen can be a little iffy, but you should check to make sure you inputted the data correctly. Then you hit enter. You get the 74.2, which is what we came up with last time, and then divide by 6. All right. So the first nifty trick that I'm going to show you on the calculator is related is related specifically to the TI-84s, and that has to do with the fraction function. And this is going to help us a great deal when we get into probability, so we want to learn about this and be comfortable with it as quickly as possible. So to input a fraction, I'm just going to jot it here. To input a fraction. We're going to hit alpha, select y equals, and then option 1. Let me just move the calculator out of the way. Okay. To input a fraction, you're going to select alpha, which is that green key, followed by y equals, and then option 1. Right. Alpha, y equals brings up a menu. That menu is all the different things you could do with fractions in the calculator. All right. The first option says n over d. N stands for numerator, d for denominator. All right. So numerator, denominator. So if I hit enter, it's going to allow me to type my numerator on the top and my denominator on the bottom. So if I wanted to, I could actually make the display in my calculator look just like what I wrote down on paper. So I'll just type in all that stuff. I'm just going to leave it at 6 instead of saying 6.0. To get to the bottom part of the fraction, just hit the down arrow. Then I can put the 6 in. It's up to you. I mean, you could. Yeah, you could do that, or yeah, alpha y equals is the screen that you want. Yeah. All right. And so once you put your denominator in, you have your fraction all set up. You could hit the right arrow to get out. It's not in the fraction function anymore. And then you can hit enter. And then it'll do the calculations for you. All right, and that's what we came up with last time. The alpha y equals is a different way of coming up with the average, yeah. Okay, so that's how you input a fraction. Now, some common issues that folks have had with fractions is fractions themselves, like manipulating them, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, reducing fractions. The good thing about this calculator is it will manipulate fractions for you, right? So you don't have to worry about simplifying fractions anymore, right? Like in an algebra class. The calculator is going to handle that. Right, so if I had to add two fractions, the calculator can do that and simplify the answer for me. But let's say if I just wanted to simplify one single fraction. So I'm just going to give an example off the top of my head here. Let's say we have 5 over 10, a fraction 5 over 10. What's that? So alpha y equals n over d. If I were to just put in the fraction 5 over 10 and hit enter, see how it simplifies it immediately for you, all right? You don't have to worry about that anymore. So when we get to probability, this is something that the calculator is going to handle for you. You're not going to have to worry about it, all right? So that's good news, all right?
For question, Professor, can you show how to, in the calculator, how to turn a fraction into decimal?
Fraction into decimal, you just use division. So if I wanted to turn 1 over 2 into a decimal, I would just do 1, use division key, 2, and hit enter. Now, if I want to go the other way, so that brings up a good point. If I want to go the other way and I have a decimal and I want to turn it into a fraction, then what I would do is I would go into the math menu and I would select option 1, right? So I'll jot that down also. So, absolutely. So, decimal to fraction. So, type in decimal. Select math, option 1. All right, so let's say I have that 0.5 that was there. I'll type that in, 0.5. I want to turn that into a fraction. I'm going to hit math, option 1, so either the number 1 or enter. And then you also have to activate the function, so hit enter again. And it'll convert it over for you. All right.
Error syntax.
Error syntax. Yeah, bring it up.
Back to the alpha section because I just thought we're just watching it first and then we're going to start again.
So alpha.
Okay.
So
Y equal, you said, right?
yeah, alpha y.
I pressed alpha and just.
Oh, your calculator's not up to date, so let me update that for you.
Sorry, just put the batteries. Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was a good use of time because it's so important that those calculators are set up the right way to just set us up for the rest of the course. Because there's just so the calculator is a very very powerful tool if we let it be. If we don't set it up the right way and use it the right way, it's all over. All right. So, like for example, we're going to talk about outliers now. Outliers is a very important concept. You've probably heard the term in conversation at some point. Whether or not you've heard of it statistically is a different story. Um, Unless you've taken a stat course before, you probably have never seen a formula related to the concept of an outlier. If you think of an outlier as just some weird happening, something that is like, I didn't expect that to happen. Why is that there? Then you probably have a pretty decent idea of what an outlier is, right? So if you're looking at a data set, particularly this data set, the numbers kind of like they don't really have much meaning, but one of them hopefully stands out to you as being like, that, that probably shouldn't be there. That 42 just seems a little out of whack. Everything else seems like it's probably in the same neighborhood of everything else, but that 42 is a little out there. There is no context to this data though, right? Without context, it's hard to determine outliers, but you can still determine it mathematically. Conceptually, it's hard to determine outliers without context. Now, if I were to tell you that this is the set of ages of kids at a playground, and then you see 2, 4, 5, blah blah blah, and then you see 42. You're like, what's that 42-year-old doing there? It's a little weird. Get out of there, dude. You know, that 42 can be the result of a couple of things. It could be the result of maybe data entry error. Maybe the person collecting the data meant to write down a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, but forgot to hit the tab button in between, and it got put together as 42. Yeah, that's possible. But since all the remaining data points are in increasing order, like why would the 4 and the 2 be at the end? So you'd say, well, maybe not, right? Maybe maybe this is a group of kids out on a play date or something like that, and the 42-year-old is a parent watching them, and so the person running the study accidentally put the age of the parent in with the kids. Okay, that's fine. Or they just had no concept of what identifies a person as a child, you know. So, but without any context, we just look at this and say, well, there are some numbers. Let's see if there's an outlier. All right. So we need to define some terms. The first term is LQ. So let's talk about that. LQ stands for the lower quartile. And it's a lower quartile. It's one of those terms that, you know, like the more you define it, the more you need to define it, because it's like, okay, now what's a quartile? You know, so because we know what the word lower means, it's the median of stray mark the lower half of data. Do it this way. So the UQ, upper quartile, is the median of the upper half of data. Median of the upper half of data. All right. Now, textbooks, statisticians, etc. That's a Saturday morning mistake. Textbooks, statisticians, etc. They all use LQ and UQ, but for whatever reason, the calculator uses Q1 and Q3. And that's kind of a misrepresentation. There are some textbooks and statisticians that use Q1 and Q3, but there's an inconsistency. They use them interchangeably. That's what I'm getting at. So you got to recognize them both, basically, which is annoying, but it is what it is. All right. So IQR is the interquartile range That's all supposed to be one word. I'm going to fix the spacing there. And that's the difference between the different quartiles. So UQ minus LQ. The interquartile IQR, exactly. And why this little box is not going away is beyond me. Okay, we're going to live with it because I don't know why it's not going away. It does that from time to time, but it's annoying. All right, so the calculator can give us all this information. It can even compute the median for us. We learned about the median last time as the middle value in a data set. This is a small set of data. So we could very, very easily figure it out by hand, but we want to move towards proficiency with the calculator because, again, that's going to set us up for the rest of the course. So I'm going to take you through the process in the calculator for finding the lower quartile, the upper quartile, interquartile range, and then after we get all that stuff, we'll have a set of values that represent the interval of the outliers, or what would be the outliers. All right, so back to the calculator. All right, we're going to use it for more than just simple addition and subtraction and all that good stuff, and I just got to get a sense of where my field ends here. All right, so again, to get to your home screen, second mode. All right, that clears you out of whatever window you're in. If you're in some weird y equals window or anything, anywhere you don't want to be, it brings you right back to home. Second mode, that's the quick function. All right. After that, what we want to do is we want to hit the stat key. All right, so we're gonna hit the stat key. All right, so I'm gonna jot this down. I'll do it in red. So stat. And then you're gonna hit enter on edit. All right, So you're in the stat menu. You're going to hit enter on the word edit. Or you could just hit, you could always hit the row number. So if you just hit the number 1, that'll do the job also. All right. So if you don't feel like scrolling down, like if I told you hit stat 5 or something like that, you don't have to scroll down to 5. You just hit the number 5. All right. So here it's stat edit. So hit either the number 1 or hit enter on that first option. And it brings you into like Microsoft Excel Lite. That's not really what it is, but it's a spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet function on your calculator. All right. So if you're going to do data analysis on your calculator, this is where the magic's going to happen. All right. There's a lot of wonderful things that could happen in this area of the calculator, but it could also be very dangerous. All right. A lot of those dangers, I think I'll address when they happen, because if I start trying to point them all out right now, I think I'm going to confuse people. All right. So for now, we're gonna live in Shangri-La and hope everything works out all right, and go from there. So type in the number 2. You're in column L1, so type in the number 2, and then hit enter. Notice how it brings you down 1 cell. All right. Then type in the number 4. Where did it go? Right. Okay. So you hit the number 2, then enter, then hit the number 4, then enter, then the number 5, then enter. So you're putting in all the data values, but hitting enter after each one. Okay, so I'll just clear that out so you don't have to worry about it. Okay.
42 too?
Yeah, all the way down to 42. Okay, let me just clear that out. And then I'll walk everybody through how to clear data out. Everybody else okay? So each value, one at a time, enter after each one of them. All right, so then 6, enter, 7, enter, and so on. All right, so double check your work after you type in your data points, because it is very, very easy to make a typo when you do stuff like this. And so what happens on a test when I ask you to present the mean or standard deviation using the calculator? You type in the data, you click some buttons, you hit enter, you write down what the calculator gives you. It's wrong. I have no means of telling where you went wrong, because all you gave me was the answer. So you'd lose full credit, right? All because maybe instead of typing in a 6, you typed in an extra 5, right? So go back up the line and make sure, double check that everything is the way you want it to be, all right? Now, personally, and I'm not the best example of that, because, you know, I don't lose points. So I rush through and I put data points in, and you're like, well, you didn't double check. Yeah, I'm not taking the test. So, you know, I don't always practice what I preach, but I do try to. All right. So I'm going to just make a note here that we'll input the data. Up. I don't like this. All right, so stat edit input data. That's what we did. All right, so then after that, what we're going to do is quit. Yeah, we're going to quit right in the middle of this process. We're going to get out of here. Second mode. I'll write that down too. Put commas in between to distinguish. First press second, then press mode. Very important, yes. Second, then mode.
and that, right?
Yes. You're never pressing keys simultaneously on this calculator. All right? Yeah. The reason why I have you quit out of there is because if we go on to the next step, sometimes it's pretty rare, but sometimes it'll take what your next calculation is going to be and accidentally put it into the spreadsheet also and ruin everything. So get a fresh screen before moving on to the next step. And that next step is to hit stat again. So it's going to seem like we're doing the same stuff. We're going to hit stat. And then you're going to hit the right arrow. And that's going to bring you into the calculate menu. So stat. Now that stat key, you're going to hunt around, at least in the early going, if you're not familiar with the calculator. You'd be like, where's that stat key again? You know, a couple weeks in, yeah, that's going to be muscle memory. You're going to be using that key so frequently, you'll know exactly where the stat key is. You'll be looking for the auth key. You know, like that's how much you're going to remember the stat key. All right, so I wouldn't worry about that. Then you're going to hit the right arrow. So you hit stat, you're going to hit the right arrow over to calc. Now you have this whole world of calculations that you can perform on the data that you just plugged into the calculator. I mean, how wonderful is that? All these options that are built in to this calculator for this course so that you don't have to do it by hand. I mean, somebody was looking out for you. All right? So option 1 is 1 var stats. That's the one we want, 1 var stats. So you're going to select that. At this point, you kind of have to take on faith that that means something important, 1 var stats. Because I haven't talked to you about what a var is, variable. Stats, I mean, I haven't really gotten in too much in depth on what the concept of statistics is really telling us. So for now, it just means that it's going to do the math that we want it to do. And you'll see in the display what it's going to represent. But it brings up this interface. If you have one of the older calculators, or if I didn't update your calculator, so if I hadn't taken the time to update your calculators, this interface would not have come up. You would have gotten something completely different, and it would have been massively confusing. This is bad enough, but having an entire class with a bunch of different calculators that have different displays, that's a nightmare when it comes to this topic. All right, this is the default setting. All right, list 1, frequency list and calculate. So I'm going to snip this in. I'm going to just put it in here and talk about it briefly. This snipping tool like changed my life as a teacher. It's like one-stop shopping for plagiarism. Yeah, it's matherism. Oh, that sucked. That's the one where, like, the first cough is telling the body, like, yeah, keep going, we can do this, we can make it happen, there's more, but we can get it, this is the time it's going to work. And then you keep going, and all you're doing is stripping your throat raw, and then, nah, it's all right. It's all right. Is that 3 now?
They like your class.
Oh, you didn't see the one that almost came in. Yeah, there was one that did the pause outside like this, one of these moves, and then back around the other way. So maybe 2.5 people. So it was kind of cool. So they just hear like excitement and enthusiasm over statistics. Nah. So this is the interface, and the L1 is the default. Now that's the column list. That's the column title or list title. All right. So if you are inputting data into the calculator, you need to tell it when it's doing the calculations where to find that data. If you don't tell it where to find the data, you might get irrelevant results. The calculator will come back and say the mean is 28, and you'd be like, why is the mean 28? This is ridiculous. Meanwhile, you didn't tell it to look at the right data set, right? Now, sometimes you want to change the list, right? So what I'm going to do here, wrong thing, is I'm going to snip something else. I'm going to snip a portion of the keypad on your calculator. And look at that. Whoa, why does it do it like that? That's insane. I mean, that does definitely emphasize the point. Give my highlighter out. These bad boys here are the different list titles. All right, so if you hit second followed by 1, that'll bring up L1. So let's say I put some data in L2, in column L2. Then if I put some data in column L2, then I would call this list, I would change it to L2. All right, we're going to go over that in a minute, so it'll be very clear. For now, the list is defaulted as L1. If it weren't, then I would have to make that change. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take you through the process. I'm going to say, okay, let's say we're in this list and there was nothing there. It was a blank list. But I know I put my data, like I did stat, edit. Don't do this, but just watch. You see how in stat edit, I have L1 here listed as my column title. So when I do stat over to calc, which is where we all are, let's say it had something else written in here or nothing at all. You'd be like, well, what do I do? Well, I know my data's in L1. So then I look on my keypad and I see, okay, L1 is what I would get if I hit second followed by 1, so that's what I would type in. All right. We leave frequency list blank. All right. We leave frequency list blank unless we have a frequency list, and since I haven't talked to you about frequency lists, there's nothing else to this. Yes. Right. Second. Yep. And then there you go. Yep. Now, when we learn about frequency tables, we'll do something with the frequency list, but we're not there yet, so we're going to leave that blank. So then you just hit calculate, and it gives you this magnificent raw list of outputs. All right. So we just need to know how to navigate this. I'm gonna snip all of this in here. All the way at the bottom of that list, it says calculate. You hit the down arrow. Why? All right, so I'm gonna put all this information in here, and then I'll talk to you about each different piece because this is so incredibly important for us. All right. Now we got to this display. One bar stats tells us a bunch of things. The very first option, which I'll write down in a minute, that's X bar. That stands for mean. All right. So if I need to find the average of this data set, which I didn't need to know, I have it. That's great. It also tells me a few other things that we're going to learn in a little while. N stands for the number of values in the data set, but then it has that little down arrow. That down arrow tells me that if I hit the down arrow, that there's more information that will follow. So I'm going to hit the down arrow. I'm going to hit the down arrow until that down arrow goes away. And what we'll have is really everything that we need in order to answer this particular question. Because a few minutes ago when I defined what upper and lower quartiles were, an interquartile range, it really called for this information. Right? So we have, and I'll just highlight them, the first quartile here, which is the same as the lower quartile. We have Q3 here, which is the same as the upper quartile. So the calculator figured that out for us, right, without us having to do the work. Now, if you have any experience with statistics, I'll steal my own thunder a little bit here. If you don't worry about it. But standard deviation is a pretty complicated calculation to do by hand. This calculator just gave it to us. Right? We didn't have to figure it out on our own. Right? So when I show you what standard deviation looks like, you're going to see how complicated that is. And you'll be very grateful that the calculator is willing to give us that information. Right? So we now have the ability to come up with the more complicated aspects of the interquartile, the outlier formula, which is the interquartile range, without having to do any serious work. Now, this is a data set that only had 9 values in it. You could already imagine, what if there were 50 values? What if there were 100 values? The hardest part of this problem, obviously, would be typing the data in, because everything else would be exactly the same. No more work in any other capacity except for typing in the data. That's how you know that you have a good technique on your hands. All right. So now we just got to do something with this, and that's where the formula comes into play. So the next step in the process is to find the interquartile range, so the IQR. That's going to be Q3 minus Q1. All right. I defined it up here as UQ minus LQ, but we want to think the way the calculator does because, that's our resource. That's what we have. All right. So interquartile range is going to be 9.5 minus 4.5. Which is going to be what? Okay. All right, so then we got that gross formula at the top of the screen. All right, that's the rest of the journey towards the interquartile range. So that's where we got to go. All right, so let me bring that back into play. I'm going to snip that, bring it back down, and then just so you can see the whole screen and not have to have me scroll back and forth. Still, why so huge? All right, so LQ minus 1.5 the IQR minus, comma, UQ plus 1.5 the IQR. All right, so LQ is the same as Q1. Right, so I'm going to make a note of that. This is the same as saying LQ, and this is UQ. So 4.5 minus, it's not a minus, cripes.
Wait, just a second. Q1, it's lower or upper?
Q1 is lower. Weirdly, though, it's the one that's above physically, so it can be a little weird like that. So 4.5 minus 1.5 times 5 comma 9.5 plus 1.5 times 5. So 4.5 minus 1.5 times 5 is then 9.5 plus 1.5 times 5.
4.5 was the LQ, the 9.5 was the UQ,
Correct.
and the 5 was the IQ.
Correct. So we're going to calculate these separately. I'll move this over. So each one of these is their own calculation. This followed by this. Clear the screen again, so second mode, and then 4.5 minus 1.5 times 5. So just type it in directly as you see it, parentheses for the multiplication. That'll give you your lower end.
Sorry, I was ready. How can I go back to this?
Second mode. No problem. And then hit enter. That'll give you the -3. And then you do the same thing on the high end, so 9.5 plus 1.5 times 5. And you got 17 is what you said? I agree with that. So, -3 to 17 is our interval. All right? So, the pain that immediately follows it that really kind of drives it all home. Yeah, so what this is the interval of non-outliers. So any value that falls in that interval is not going to be an outlier. So those are the values that would make sense based on the numbers. Any value that falls outside of that interval would be an outlier. So is there an outlier? Yeah, 42. So therefore, so 3 dots, when I make 3 dots in the form of a triangle, that means the word therefore. You could write therefore, you could write so, you could write whatever you want. I just like writing this because it only involves writing 3 dots. So therefore 42 is an outlier. Alright, so therefore 42 is an outlier. Just kind of write it shorthand and that's fine. I used a lot more space on the screen than I would on paper. You probably, hopefully were able to fit most of it all in the space that I gave you. Because I like to get the little snips in there for instruction. So I'm going to show you now how to evaluate data sets that have frequency tables. All right? So we're going to find the mean, median, and mode of this frequency table, but I'm going to kind of streamline the process. Instead of going through, because I have the formulas here, I think, for the sake of me not hacking up the long class very long, and also, I think you get the idea, like, there are sometimes you have to use a formula, and sometimes the calculator can save us from having to use formulas. I'm just going to show you how the calculator is going to do all this for you. All right. So let's look at just this example right here and find the mean, median, and mode just of this guy. So mean, which is x bar, median, which is abbreviated as MED, or sometimes people use capital M, but I don't know that that's necessarily the best abbreviation. And then mode, which doesn't have an abbreviation. Mode's the only one the calculator's not going to give you, but that's the only one that you don't need the calculator for, because you could just look at the data set. A frequency table tells you how often a value occurs in a data set. So this number 1 occurs 10 times. This 2 occurs 3 times. This 3 occurs once. The 4 occurs 8 times. The 5 occurs 5 times. So which number occurs the most? 1. That's your mode. All right. You didn't need a calculator to tell you that. Most frequent is the mode. It's as simple as that. All right. So no calculator required for the mode. Now for the mean and median, you could use formulas, but we're going to save ourselves from those formulas. All right. In the second unit, we'll have to do a little bit with the mean formula, but I'll reintroduce that anyway. So back to the stat editor. Stat edit. You don't have to clear the screen. Yeah, just hit stat edit, and it'll bring us right back into the editor. And you'll see the same data set that we had from before. All right. Now I'm going to show you how to clear data values out. All right. Now most of the time you're going to think what you want to do and then translate that into the calculator's language for doing it. This is one of those situations where what you're going to want to do and the calculator's language are actually going to coincide. I want to clear the data, so I'm going to use the clear key. But the way you use the clear key is important, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to go right up onto the column heading. So you're going to hit the up arrow, right onto the L1. Then hit clear. And then hit either enter or down. Generally enter is good enough for people, so hit enter and it'll wipe out the entire column, or all the entries in the column. All right. If you hit delete on the column heading, then you're going to have a little bit of a problem, but it's not a problem that we can't fix. It's just I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, right? Because people will go down that rabbit hole, and I'm happy to kind of navigate you out. But I have found, just like what I said before, that if I start getting into the what ifs too early, when people don't really know too much about the calculator to begin with, then it gets too confusing. So if you end up saying, go in here and say, where'd my L1 go? Make yourself known to me, talk to me, and I'll help you figure it out. Right? And if enough people have that problem, then that happened to you? All right. If enough people have that problem, then I'll walk everybody through it. Oh, wow, okay. So when you want to bring them back, what you do is you just hit second 6. See it's L6. Hit enter. And then that'll bring that back. Okay, second delete. Okay, bring a new one in. And second 5. Second delete. L4. Second delete. Brings a new one in. And L3. Enter. Second delete. Inserts a new one. L2, and then finally L1. And there's your raw list of data that was there originally. Now, as long as you just hit clear and enter, you're not going to have to worry about that problem. All right, so the first column of data, we're going to type into L1. The second column of data, we're going to type into L2. And I'll show you how the L2 business works in a sec, but let's take care of the L1 stuff. So, 1, enter, 2, enter, 3, enter, 4, enter, 5, enter. So we always do a row by row, then column by column. All right, so down the first column, then down the second column, then down the third column, and keep going. If you have more than 2 columns. All right, so now I want to get to the second column. I've completed everything I want to do in the first column. I want to get to the second column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the right arrow. That's going to bring me over to the very first entry, very first available entry in the second column. And I can do the exact same stuff I did in the first column, except with the data entries in the second column. So 10, enter, 3, enter, 1, enter, 8, enter, and then 5, enter. And so at this point, you just want to do a quick double check. Make sure you didn't do something egregious. Everything looks pretty much the way we want it to, so we're good. Again, my recommendation, just get out of here, go to the home screen. Second mode, that quits you out of there. Fresh screen. Something that's not very satisfying is that there's no save button. So there is an element of trust where you have to say, yeah, it's going to stay there. Even though I didn't tell it to save all that information I just typed in, I know that when I go back there, it's still going to be there. You just have to believe it's there. If you lose that belief, that's when things start going wrong. So always believe it's going to be there and you'll be fine. All right? So now, just like we did before, stat, right arrow to calculate. We're still going to do 1-bar stats. And in fact, we're going to live in 1-bar stats for the foreseeable future. Okay, so it's a good habit to get into. So hit either the number 1 or hit enter. And it brings you back into this menu that we had before. All right, which I'm going to snip and bring in. All right. Now, in this context, it's a little bit of a different story because I have a frequency table. All right. I didn't have a frequency table before. Because this little word is here, that means that this just became relevant. All right. So that means that I need to type in where I could find my frequency list in the calculator. So I have to type in L2. All right. So in the calculator, I need to hit the down arrow. I don't know why it has the alpha lock on. That's so you can write like letters and stuff. We don't really need that. It's not going to impact anything, so don't worry about it. It's just weird to look at. My list is in L2. What do you think I want to hit? Second followed by 2. And then go to calculate and hit enter. All right, so we're doing that again, second 2. All right, so go to calculate, hit enter. It gives you this glorious display with all these numbers. Now hit enter on calculate. And now you have that. All right, so the mean, X bar, right at the top of the list. How nice is that? All right, we're going to go 3 decimal places, so we're going to round that to 2.815. So 2.815. Let me get rid of my stray marks here because they seem to come up even with my little tissue pack over here. That's not going to work. I also need the median. In this display, I can just kind of sneak over here and use my display from before. When I hit the down arrow, along with the Q1, Q3, and all that other stuff, along with all that information, I got the median. So in this display, if I hit the down arrow, look what shows up right there, median. Plain as day. But only if you look for it. Right? That's the thing. Like, you got to know to hit the down arrow and that there's more information to follow. So hit that down arrow. So I'm hitting that down arrow and say, oh, look, there's the median. Which requires, really, in actuality, it requires you have a sense that the median is there to begin with, because it's not like you're going to hit that function and then start exploring, saying, oh, I wonder what's in this menu, like the first time on the day of the test. Like you already have a sense of what's in there. It's just now I need to know to go there for that information, right? And so what I have found in the past is that what most people do, because I allow 1 index card on the unit test, on the first unit test anyway. After that, different rules for every test. But on the first unit test, you're allowed 1 index card with notes. And so what a lot of people will do is they'll just put little calculator steps on that index card because that's the thing that they're worried about. They don't think they'll forget anything else because they're familiar with a lot of the math stuff. The thing that's new in this course is all this calculator stuff that I'm throwing at you. And so if that kind of alleviates a little bit of the tension, then I'm glad to offer that. But yeah, but that requires you to actually take some decent notes going in, because I've had it before where somebody would forget the day of the test that they could have a little note card, and they would say, okay, well, what do you have on your note card? And give me your note card. And they write down everybody else's notes. And then on the test, they'd be like, wow, dang it, I knew all this stuff. Where's the stuff I don't know? And that's the stuff they don't have. So, it's stuff that's personal to you that'll be most beneficial. Right? So, things like if you don't think that you're going to remember to hit the down arrow to find the median, then that's something that you're going to want to write to yourself. Just index card. 1 index card, yes. We're looking for an upgrade, I understand. We were going for it. I respect the attempt, but yeah, 1 index card. You do get a note sheet for the finals, so yeah, you get more for the final than for an individual test. Yeah. Yeah, you just gotta sweat it out a little bit in the early goes. So, all right. So let me